Good to go, okay? Good to go, okay? You're all set.
Oh, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Kyewan Song, and it is so great to welcome you to a very special Long Island Board of Realtors and North Central Jersey Association of Realtors webinar, where we will embark on an exciting virtual journeys to Portugal. Portugal's real estate market has experienced remarkable growth in recent years, fueled by its stunning natural beauty, rich cultural heritage, and favorable investment climate. Cities like Lisbon and Porto have emerged as prime destinations for both domestic and international investors, offering a diverse range of properties from historic apartments to modern development. Before we start, a few housekeeping guidelines. Throughout the session, you will be muted. The speakers will not be looking at the chat. However, Diana or Bustamante will be monitoring it. Should you have any questions, please type them in the chat to be addressed later on during the Q&A. We also remind everyone that any conversations about commissions is strictly prohibited and will not be discussed in this webinar. To begin, please help me welcome today's presenters. Pedro Pereira, CEO for Portuguese International Realty. Sara Quatros, legal advisor. Claudia Vasconcelos, legal advisor for APEMIP. Pedro?
Oh, do you want me to start? Okay.
Yes.
Good morning to you all. So we have a short video we want to share to start with.
It doesn't seem like there's any sound coming out.
Oh, something happened. There's no sound coming from the video?
No
Yeah,
sound.
no sound.
Sorry. Oh, I'm very sorry. I've selected the sound to come out, but I don't understand why. But I can put the link here, and you can listen afterwards. Sorry, it's not a good start. So to start with, I want to share some insights about Portuguese economic status. So Portugal is just on the other side of where are you now. It's the first land that we encounter if you take a boat and add to Europe. In between us, Portugal has two inlands, Açores and Madeira. Different backgrounds for both those islands and or group of islands. Açores has a close relationship with the US because in the past, many Portuguese ran away from Açores due to a volcano eruption and the poverty in those islands and immigrate to the eastern coast of the US. In fact, in Açores, there's still a law signed by JFK giving those citizens from those islands in Açores a special status to be accepted in the US. So we have these bounds with the US. Portugal has a population around 10 millions. Lisbon, which is the capital, 500,000, more than this. So small cities when compared to those in the US. The average GDP per capita is 29,000 euros. Yeah, Portugal has the euro currency, as many other countries in the Eurozone. And Portugal is one of the oldest countries in Europe. It was independent from what existed then in 1139, and their frontiers are very stable, are one of the most stable frontiers in the Europe. We are part of NATO as well, and we were one of the first countries to abolish death penalty. So you can see here some information on the GDP. Is Portugal has a average. It's not one of the biggest in Europe. That's a small problem that we have in our economy. We are unable to reach the average in the European zone. So, but we are a good student. We always say this. Portugal is a good student, but we are unable to be more than what we are now. It's like 2.5% per year increase. Inflation, you know what the situation here in Portugal is. It's a big inflation, like 5%, but it's decreasing. That's good to hear, but we need more than this. Portugal never had much unemployment. Portugal, we say that wants to be employed, can be employed. It's easy to get a job if you want to work. But nowadays we see what other countries in Europe see is like some professions are not done by Portuguese citizens because they don't want to do that. Hard works, I mean, being in the field collecting agricultural products like grapes for the wine, tomatoes and those kind of foods that it's hard work. They are done by immigrants. So Portugal has always been a country that receives lots of people from other countries. We have been in very close to Africa because Portugal had like colonies there, Angola, Mozambique, so Cabo Verde. We know how to receive those people that and you can when you are in Portugal, you see lots of ethnics cultures here in Portugal. I think once some in August, Pope Francis was here in Lisbon, and in his statements, he said something like this: there is a neighborhood in Lisbon with like 15 different cultures living there. So I guess, and you can see this, that Portugal welcomes everyone and is able to integrate them in our economy as better as we can. Moving to the real estate market, Portugal is interesting from the point of view that it has always been very receptive to international brands. Like 20 years ago or around 20 years ago, we have seen brands like Remax, Century 21, ERA moving to Portugal. And the operation here was starting to grow. And nowadays, when you go to the convention of international conventions for these brands, you will always hear that Portugal is a huge success. Like, for instance, Remax in Portugal is one of the biggest operations in Europe. And sometimes it's just the next country after Canada. So America is the number one, then follows Canada, and probably will hear like Portugal in the first place. It's weird because we are a small country, as I said in the past. But this doesn't mean that there are only international brands in Portugal. Of course, there are local brands, big national groups that have created their network, are operating in Portugal. And of course, you have those independent ones that don't belong to a big brand, but they are still working and giving good service. We can say that Portugal is around 30,000 agents, like around 7,000 brokerage. And we have, let us say, 2 national associations. The biggest one is APEMIP, that is here and is like the bilateral partner, as long as UCI that I represent. It's the 2 bilateral partners for NAR in Portugal. Regarding the transactions, real estate transactions, we have seen a decline in sorry for not updating this graphic, but in recent years we had around 150,000 transactions per year, more or less like this. So this is the average. I guess when you compare to the US, it's small, but you cannot compare Portugal to the US unless you skip some zeros on the right. So I can show you here in this graphic, and this is updated. Okay, this is updated, and I can show you a map of Portugal. Those islands on the left-hand side, and this on the right-hand side is Portugal continental. The gray area is Spain. Spain is our neighbor. And you can see the average price there. So the average price, national average price, is that you see on the top, 1,565 euros per square meter. The most expensive one are in the Algarve. Algarve is like by the sea, like leisure, relaxing beach, calm, lots of demand for international buyers. That's why the price is so big, because the houses are very expensive. You can see cheaper ones, but big and expensive houses. Lisbon and Porto follow. And then we see Madeira. Madeira as well is a destiny that is chosen also or the good weather and the nice quality of life that they have there. Some years ago, like famous people would go to Madeira to get well from pneumonia and those other ills, such as Princess Sisi was very famous in Europe. She was there to cure for her illness. The interior of Portugal, which are the light color, you can see average price below 1,000 euros per square meter. So you have like a good range, 500 to 5 times more at the average price. Here, if you look deeper, in some regions, districts of the Greater Lisbon and the Greater Porto, that those are the biggest cities in Portugal, you will have a different outlook. You can see that this central business district of Lisbon, it can reach up to 5,000 euros per square meter, which is very high. And for instance, Porto, the same district, could reach more than 3,000 euros per square meter. But obviously, if you go far from those cities, the center city will have less expensive prices. I look, for instance, on the right-hand side. Once you see Porto, on the north, you have Varzim, but it's like 40 kilometers between Povo do Varzim and Porto, and you can see that the price is like half in Varzim, but it's like a good option because there's a direct metro connecting those cities, so you can take like 40 minutes commuting on a public transportation, one single transportation from one city to the other, and you can have a nice place, cheaper one in Povo de Varzim and work in Porto. I can now show you some highlights about our regions and different lifestyles. Well, it's a little bit confusing. I'm sorry for that, but we wanted to highlight some of the properties you can find. If you go Porto is like Lisbon city center. You have nice buildings, old buildings that have been rehabilitated, good quality of the building, nice city life, everything near. If you go even north of Porto, you find the forests, and you can have like a rural house in the countryside, cheaper one, with like a plot where you can do your gardening or you can cultivate your greens as well. If you go on the eastern side, you can find like vineyards like these you have on the top, like here. Those are vineyards. They are the so-called Douro region valley. Like old properties with some historic background and followed by lots of extensions of vineyards. Once you look into the interior of the country, those cheaper areas, you can find like Montes, is like the hills with detached houses with some area as well, big plots. You can build a swimming pool, as you can see there. You have no neighbor nearby, so you have that quiet sense of quiet and solitude there. The interior also has some interesting rural plots, like extensions that can be chosen for those investors, for instance, to produce either cows to produce milk or agriculture, greens, many options. Those Algarve, you can imagine like Miami or Florida, is those kind of properties that we'll find here in the southern region of Portugal. The islands, yeah, the islands are different. Funchal, it's much more cosmopolitan. And if you go to Azores, those are the Azores Islands, like 9 islands, like different islands. You have not so cosmopolitan. You can have like a big city, but if you are looking for a source, I'm sure you're not looking for a big city. So you like to have like in a small town or a small villa with greenery and very quiet, looking at the ocean. It's indeed very special. International buyers have started, not now, but some years ago, like 5, 8, 10 years ago, start looking at Portugal. And I've shared, I can share with you, I think all this information is public. Madonna lived in Portugal, in Lisbon, in fact, for a couple of years. She's not living here, but one of her last albums was done here in the city. And in fact, she rented this palace you can see here in the central Lisbon. Monica Bellucci, it's a famous actress. She was buying also a property. Michael Fassbender, it's also an actor. I'm sure you know him. Is living as an house here in Lisbon. And the famous shoemaker, Christian Louboutin, is not in Lisbon. It's south of Lisbon, like 1 hour. 1 hour from Lisbon. He started to live there, and he has now opened his boutique hotel. And this summer he has received a lot of VIPs going there. So this is the kind of properties you can see here, like Christian Louboutin, probably something like this area. Vineyards, pine trees, sorry, very close to the ocean. If you go to the north, you have those manors, lots of history, very big plots. If you go to Alentejo, it's on the interior of the country. And if you have a good architect, you can do like architectural pieces like this one. It's very impressive. I don't know if you are aware, but for instance, Portugal has like 2 Pritzker architects living in Portugal. This one on the left-hand side is like a source, and on the right-hand side, probably something near Lisbon or Cascais as well. It's very famous. This is Parque das Nações. It's like Lisbon, and yeah, those towers are residential ones. So lots of options. But what I want to share with you is like international buyers can choose Portugal for 4 different reasons. And those you can see on the screen. You can buy it for a vacation, like the second home, or you can buy to live, the famous D7 that Claudia is addressing that to you. Or you can buy to invest, and you are looking for a return on investment, or you can buy to sell. I think there's a lot of options that you can look into once you start looking into Portugal. Now I will give the micro to Claudia. Dr. Claudia is going to address you on tax issues. Thank you. I do not hear Claudia, Evan.
Sorry, I'm sorry, forgot to unmute. It's not early for me, but I sometimes have problems with Zoom. So good morning. My name is Claudia Vasconcelos. I am Head of Business Development at NewCo. We are a one-stop shop for investors and expats. So we assist for more than 3 decades clients from all over the world, including from the US, setting up and relocating or investing in Portugal. Before going to the insights I'd like to give you with regard to immigration and tax for those that, as Pedro described, have the want the option of living in Portugal, just a very brief side note. In addition to the comments that Pedro made on the ties between the Azores and the US, Madeira is also intertwined with your American history. Actually, the Declaration of Independence was celebrated with Madeira wine. Thomas Jefferson was a big fan. So our history is also connected. Now, we all know and understand very well the advantages and benefits of investing and living in this wonderful country. But the question is, does Portugal want to have immigration and foster immigration? And the answer is clear. Pedro already mentioned, yes, Portugal wants you. We have a big problem, not only in terms of our economy, but also in terms of our demography. So the government has, for many years now, created programs, both from an immigration perspective and also from a tax perspective, to attract new residents into our country. One of the most famous ones has been the Residence by Investment Program, the so-called Golden Visa. This program was created in 2012. It has been subject to many changes. One of them, the most recent one, is actually now being implemented. It has been a huge success with investors precisely in real estate. As of the end of this month, so as soon as the new law is published, it will no longer be possible to get a golden visa through investments in real estate properties, but there are other options, as I will explain. I will also explain a little bit the difference between these programs, the golden visa and the conventional residence visas, which continue to exist. And in fact, the government has progressively introduced other new types and broader types of residence permits, precisely to accommodate the different profiles of immigration into Portugal. And for those that want to live in Portugal, there's also a special tax regime for non-habitual residents, which I will explain a little bit in more detail. Now, what is the main difference between the golden visa and the conventional, so-called conventional residence visa? I will focus on the D7, but I just wanted to highlight that there are various options. The main difference is, one, the investments. In the case of the golden visa, because it's a residence by investment program, it requires the investor to invest a minimum amount. Nowadays, with the new law, as I said, real estate investments are no longer allowed, but the investor can choose the funds option or a company creation, contributions to scientific or cultural research. There are several options. I would say the minimum investment in the case of the golden visa is 250,000 euros, or it can be reduced to about 200 in interior regions of Portugal. With the conventional residence permits, there is no minimum investment. The applicant must prove that it has minimum subsistence means to survive in Portugal. Just to give you an idea, in the case of individual applicant, it's about 9,500 euros per year. That's what we consider to be sufficient to survive and live in Portugal. The other, and I would say here lies the main difference or interest of the golden visa with regard to the conventional visas, or let's say the D7. And it's related to the minimum stay in Portugal. So in the case of golden visa, the applicants have access to residence in Portugal, visa-free travel in the EU and in Schengen countries, eventually nationality in the future, with an obligation of spending only a minimum of 7 days per year in Portugal. With the D7, it's required a transfer, let's say, of residence. The applicant intends to move to Portugal, so a minimum of 6 consecutive months or 8 intercalated months in a year is required. The processing time, on the other hand, is a bit different. Currently, the Golden Visa is taking about 1 year, 1 year and a half to be processed. The D7 and other conventional residence permit visas are much faster. The renewal periods, in the case of the Golden Visa, 1 year for the first approval, and this can be renewed for 2 periods of 2 years, so a total of 5 years. With the D7, the applicant gets a first authorization for 2 years, renewable for 3, again, a total of 5. After 5 years, in both scenarios, the applicant can apply for permanent residency and, if desired, also nationality, Portuguese nationality. Both allow for family reunification, the nationality I've mentioned, and another important difference, I would say, relates to the tax residence. So because the Golden Visa applicants is only required to stay in Portugal for a minimum of 7 days per year, it is not considered that he is subject to changing the tax residence, which is not the case of the D7. So that has been the great advantage of the Golden Visa, possibility to live in Portugal without the obligation to become tax residents. So for the Golden Visa requirements, as I've mentioned, first you need a tax number and a bank account in Portugal. The types of investments currently are 5 actually non-real estate investment funds in a minimum amount of €500,000, or a company plus 5 employees or 10 employees, or scientific research investment also in the minimum amount of €500,000, or a cultural contribution, in this case of 250K, possibility to reduce these two last options to in 20% if the investment is done in a non-densely populated region of the country. Then there are standard documents that are required by the investor: criminal record, evidence of tax number, health insurance, and family documentation proving the ties with the main investor in the case of family reunification. Another big difference here is that the application for the Golden Visa has to be submitted in Portugal. With the D7, the requirements change slightly with regard to the investment criteria. So in this case, there is no need to make a specific minimum amount investment, but the client has to prove that it already has accommodation in Portugal. So the applicant must either have a lease contract for a medium to long-term lease contract anywhere in Portugal, or purchase a property and provide evidence of the deeds and that the property is in his or her own name. And the other means are what I've mentioned: criminal records, proof of minimum subsistence. In the case of the D7, what is required specifically for this type of visa is that the applicant must provide evidence that he or she is retired, so pension funds or pension income that can be received either on a regular basis or occasionally, or alternative, that that person is the recipient of passive income. So if I have an investment portfolio, I get interest or capital gains, very often dividends from a company. These are examples of what is considered passive income and can be used as evidence for the D7. In case the person is not retired or doesn't live out of financial investments, another important alternative also is, for instance, if I have rental real estate income from the US, if I receive real estate income, that also serves as a proof of passive income. It's also considered passive income. And then a personal motivation letter, travel insurance, and again, documentation for the family reunification if necessary. Now, a difference between the D7 and all other traditional conventional visas is that in this case, the application must be submitted in the US. So the applicant must apply at the center specifically in the US, in the VFS center that is responsible to deal with the application on behalf of the Portuguese embassy in the US. There are 3 centers that depend on the region, on the state where the applicant is located. So most of the questions I have from US clients, from American clients is what should I choose? Should I go for a golden visa or should I get a conventional, a D7, let us say? Typically, what we try to do is understand with the clients, what's the objective? What's your plan? What's your intent? Is it a plan B? Am I looking, I want to live in the US and continue to live here, but I'm thinking long term, within 5 years maybe, or maybe if something changes dramatically in the economy or policy of my country, I want to move away and go to Portugal and go to Europe. If it's a plan B, or is it a plan A? Am I planning in the next 5, 6 months, 1 year to really move to Portugal? And here lies the solution. If it's a plan B, then the only option is the golden visa, because it will give you the residence permit, but it does not automatically consider you a tax resident and doesn't give you the obligation to move to Portugal. I haven't mentioned it, but the D7 and other conventional visas are granted for 4 months. So the person has 4 months to move to Portugal and request the Portuguese authorities or get from the Portuguese authorities a residence permit. So if it's not something that is in your agenda in the near future, it doesn't make sense. So in case it's a plan A, there's the D7 and many other options with the conventional visas. Now, let's consider that the applicant has a plan B. Plan A chooses the D7 and necessarily becomes tax resident in Portugal. So what does it mean to be deemed as a tax resident in Portugal? There are 2 criteria for this. The first one, and the most common one, is that the person remains in Portugal for more than 183 days, the 6 consecutive months I mentioned, consecutive or interpolated in a determined tax year in question. It doesn't need to be specifically one civil year, but in any 12-month period that starts or ends in the year under question. This is an objective criteria, but our tax law foresees a second one, a subjective criteria that is mostly related to an intention. It's much more difficult to evaluate, but it's accepted if the person keeps in Portugal a dwelling in such conditions that show the intention of maintaining and occupying it as a main residence. There are some funny cases discussed at court to prove this intention, and just to give you an example, one client was considered that he had the intention, it's a very famous case, that had the intention of living in that particular abode because he kept his toothbrush in that house, and the tax authorities considered that this showed the intent of using it as the main and habitual residence. But I must say that in Portugal, it's typically the first criteria that is used, or if for tax reasons the person decides to deliberately go to the tax authorities and say, this is my house and I am going to live here from now on and keep it as my main residence, the tax authorities accept it. What may happen is that if there are other countries involved, so for instance, if I declare that I am tax resident in Portugal, but I spent, because I love Paris, I spent more than 6 months in Paris, then most likely you will have a problem because the tax authorities will want to tax you as well. In addition to the American authorities, of course, because as Americans, you are taxed on the basis of nationality and not only tax residents. In Portugal, tax residents are subject to personal income tax and are taxed on their worldwide income. So this is something to pay attention and keep and have in mind, because especially for American clients, you are taxed on the basis of your nationality, but in Portugal, you will also be taxed on your worldwide income, irrespective of where it is obtained. So we have very often issues of double taxation in question here. Fortunately, Portugal created a very interesting special tax regime, the so-called NCJAR tax regime, that can be applicable to anyone who becomes a new resident or tax resident of Portugal. So the requirements are, first, you must be considered a tax resident in Portugal, so meet one of the two criteria that I've mentioned before, without having been considered a tax resident in any of the 5 years before coming to Portugal. And the registration must be done until and no later than the 31st of March of the year following the one when you became a resident. For instance, I moved to Portugal in December 2023. The deadline will be March 2024. The benefits of this special tax regime are granted for 10 years, and that's it. They are not renewable. That's one of the questions I also get very often. What are the main characteristics of this special tax regime? So, in general, our personal income tax regime for normal residents like us can be quite heavy, because in some cases the rates are high, and as I mentioned, we are taxed on our worldwide income. The NCJAR grants some exemptions, considerable exemptions, depending on the type and the source of your income. So if an American moves to Portugal and gets registers as an NCJAR, he or she can be exempt from tax on dividends, interest, and royalties obtained outside of Portugal. If obtained in Portugal, it will be 28%, so it's easy to understand that the difference can be quite considerable. Pensions. For the D7 applicants, for instance, pensions are typically taxed at 10%. It's a flat tax rate granted for 10 years, if considered that they are taxed only in the country of residence, that in this case would be Portugal. These rules, I failed to mention, but it's important, are triggered by the type of income source and the double tax treaty in question. In this case, there is a double tax treaty signed between Portugal and the US. So most of these rules will apply, even though with some specificities, because this treaty is very special, particular, and quite complex. Other examples, which I believe are very relevant, real estate lease income. So again, in the case of a D7, you move to Portugal and you have properties rented out in the US. The income that you get from those properties will not be taxed in Portugal, because typically under the provisions of the double tax treaty, they can only be taxed on the at source, that is where the property is located. The same with real estate capital gains. So if you sell those properties, they will not be taxed in Portugal. Financial capital gains and other types of capital gains depend on the type of income. This is typically one of the trickiest type incomes and taxation, because it can be taxed. It can be either 0 or 28. So very often it requires a more in-depth and personalized analysis. The other types of income that can also benefit from the NHR are employment and self-employment. We have very often clients that move to Portugal that have some type of passive income, but want to continue working nowadays remotely. It's one of the most common situations we have. In this case, under the NHR, if it's an employment income taxed in the other country, it will be 0 in Portugal. Most typically, it will be 20% if not taxed in the other country, but a flat rate of 20% if the activity, the profession is considered of high value added, a high value added activity. There is a list, a specific list that the government has issued, and that describes the type of activities that are considered high value added. But for instance, directors, marketing directors, doctors, it's engineers, it's quite an extensive list, but it's important to check if that is the case. If this the activity, or if the person is not under the NHR, the typical standard personal income tax rates are progressive in Portugal. They can range for between 14.5 to 48 and even above 80,000 euros. They can go up to 52%. So it's easy to understand that the NHR can indeed be a very interesting and I would say important special tax regime to those that want to live in Portugal. Before terminating my presentation, just very, I think, important notes of attention. The NHR is not an immigration regime, so it's a tax regime that applies once immigration is solved and you already have a residence visa. It's not a full exemption regime. As I said, it depends on the type of income, the source of the income, and the double tax treaty in question. It's certainly not an one-size-fits-all. So a thorough analysis is strongly advisable and recommended before any decision that is purely tax motivated. I would say that is very often not the case, but the decision to move to Portugal purely on a tax motivation should be carefully analyzed, especially in the case of Americans, because the US-Portugal double tax treaty is one of the most complex treaties signed by Portugal. It has a lot of caveats, it has protocols, so it's really important to analyze each situation in particular. Thank you. I will be available for questions if you have any during the call.
So hello, everybody. Good morning for you. Good afternoon, who is in Portugal. I'm going to talk about the buying process. But first of all, I want you to get to know me. My name is Sara Quadros. I'm the legal advisor of APEMIP. Who doesn't know who is APEMIP? APEMIP is the Association of Professionals in Real Estate Mediation Companies of Portugal. We represent our associated companies, and we represent the sector towards the government. This is our website. If you have interest, please check it. So as you know, this all starts with online research. We also advise you to carry out this procedure with a real estate agency and find a lawyer as well to help you with the legal matters. Also, after you visit the properties and negotiate the conditions of sales, and after you place an offer, the seller has a decision to take. And usually here in Portugal, after the seller decision, it's normally to sign a promissory contract, okay? And what is usual here in Portugal is that in the promissory contract, you sign a first pay down payment. I will explain you later what this is. So someone, if you want to, you can apply for mortgage. Please know that if you, without a mortgage, this process will be faster. It will take 7 days, and with mortgage will take up to 35 days. After you sign the purchase contract, it's normally you have to register with the notary, and you have to pay, usually the buyer, the municipal transfer tax, which we call EMT. So in more detail, I'm going to explain what are the requirements to purchase a home here in Portugal. You will need a tax identification number, a valid passport and ID. This is why we advise you to carry out this through real estate agents and a lawyer, because they have to check if the property is free of people and things. They have to see if there is no legal right of preference. This is a legal subject. If you have, for example, I'm going to explain very fast to you. If you have a house and there is someone living there for more than 3 years, you have to give them a preference, okay? But you can sell the house and you can buy it if there is someone living there. You have to see if the seller is the rightful owner, have to see if there is license to use the house. The energy certificate of the property, it's mandatory to sell the house. And please note that this list of items changes according to the particular case. So this is a little resume. You sign the promissory contract that we call CPCV. The property's energy certificate is mandatory here in Portugal. You have to pay the stamp duty, and you have to have the land register. So as I promised you, what is the promissory contract? What should be in this contract, this type of contract? So first of all, has to have the identification who sells and who buys the house. Must have the price of the property, the payment methods, and has to have the identification of the value given as a sign. Usually they put in this contract the date which the final deed is going to be signed as well. And the most important thing I would say, in these contracts, you should put the identification of penalties to be applied to the buyer or the seller in case of non-compliance. Because here in the Portuguese Civil Code, usually if the buyer defaults, they will lose their deposits. Or if the seller defaults, the buyer must be compensated for double the deposit paid. This is in the Portuguese Civil Code, okay? That's why this contract is very important. So this is an example for you just to know and have an idea which are the taxes and the costs of buying a house. For you, just a note that this is all in euros, of course, and just for you to know, the property transfer tax, which we call EMT, represents more than 70% of the purchase and mortgage costs. So it's a very big number. So, as you know, here in Portugal, the factors who influence the cost of property in Portugal are the location, the size and condition, the type of property, and the demands. Now I have a little exercise for you, just for us compare here together. So I was searching for a house in Algarve, which is in the south of Portugal, and an apartment here in the center of Lisbon. You can see that the price is also in euros, that the price of this apartment in Lisbon is almost the double, and the house in Algarve are 4 rooms, it's close to the beach, and this apartment has 3 rooms, and it's literally in the center of Algarve. So this is just for you to know how is the market here in Portugal. And you can see this is the house. And this is a very good apartment as well. So just to finish, and I just want you to know that these are three very important people in this transaction, as well the buyer and the seller, that you must contact a trustworthy state agency with a valid license number, a lawyer. It may be also to be worth to hire an English-speaking Portuguese lawyer to help you with your translation and general guidance, and the notaries, because they will verify that all the process and documents are legal. And yeah, that's it. This concludes my presentation. Please, if you have any doubts, please contact me by email. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So for instance, as Sarah was mentioning, is possible once you buy a property here to apply for a mortgage here in Portugal, even though if you are not a Portuguese or European citizen. In fact, as I said previously, I work for UCI. It's NAR bilateral partner here in Portugal, and we handle international buyer mortgage as well. I will leave my contact just in case you want more information regarding it, but it's possible. Now we are coming to an end. I will ask for Evan's support on how to conduct the closing of this session. Shall we open to Q&A, or do you want to highlight some 2 or 3 properties that we have here?
I do think that there were some questions in the chat that Diana has been fielding, so maybe we should ask those questions, and
Sure.
if time is still available, we can show some of the properties.
So we did get a few questions, and thank you so much, everybody, Pedro, Sarah, Claudia. It was fabulous presentations, but we do have some questions from our attendees. The first one is dual citizenship a possibility? Is that still remaining in effect, where somebody can have citizenship in 2 countries, including Portugal?
Yes, Portugal allows for dual citizenship, so it's possible to keep to have the Portuguese nationality passport plus the other citizenship.
That's
yes.
wonderful. Along those lines, also, if your spouse is Portuguese but you're American, do your tax rules change? Is there any difference when you have one person who is Portuguese and the other one is American?
No, sorry, I'll answer it as well. No, unless the American spouse comes to live in Portugal and becomes tax resident. That is, it's not, but one doesn't become tax resident due to the fact that is married to a Portuguese citizen. Only the residents in Portugal with that criteria will be subject to tax. The same if the Portuguese spouse does not live in Portugal, that person is not subject to Portuguese income tax.
Great, thank you so much. Now, my question now is for Sarah. Does Portugal have a multiple listing service, or MLS? How do people or consumers find properties? Do they go directly to real estate agents, or is there primarily a for sale by owner type of market over there?
Well, you have, I put my source there in my presentation. You have multiple, you can see by internet, you can contact a real estate agency, you can choose what works best for you. Okay, but usually people search online and then they contact the real estate company.
But
okay.
That's a big, Diana, if I may, there's a big difference on that point with the US. Unfortunately, Portugal does not have an MLS as you have in the US, neither a national one, nor local, nor federal one, nothing. So as Sarah was mentioning, the best way is to reach out to a realtor that has access to more listings, not only those, but the others on the market, or you can Google it online using platforms that have more than 200,000 properties, the biggest portals. Unfortunately, on this point, Portugal is not so developed.
I have one more, which is pretty important to me. Are investors in Portugal buying older historical properties for renovating them or for knocking them down and building brand new?
Usually we are seeing a major tendency on buying old properties to rebuild it, to renew it from the inside, keeping the facade, for instance, because it's a historical facade, and they refurbish it from the inside. They can do that as an investment or even like a place to live, if it's a smaller dwelling or something.
Okay. And then
Usually
finally,
they don't.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, usually they don't knock it down unless it's as we have shown, they keep the facade and refurbish.
I have one more question because we're running out of time and we want to be recognizant of the time for everybody. Are the slides, I know the recording is going to be made available, but are we able to share the slides that you guys provided? We will be able to, because a lot of people have been asking for that.
Of course, you can do it.
Unfortunately, because of time, we are not able to answer a lot of these other questions, but we really appreciate your time and your expertise. This was fantastic. So Evan, is there going to be any closing remarks?
No, I just want to thank you both. I will thank everyone on the webinar for taking the time out today. Pedro, Claudia, Sarah, your information was so valuable. I love hearing about Portugal and your thank you so much for your presentations on that.
Yes, thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.